Hello, welcome back to my channel and to another reaction video. This will be checking the first episode of Antares Confederacy. This is the prologue.
Within the pages of the monumental work known as Ab Urbe Condita Libri, from the founding of the city, the Roman chronicler Titus Livius tells of a moment in the history of his empire when despair threatened to take hold in the heart of every citizen. Rome had been ravaged by the armies of the Gauls, and in the ruins of their capital, the Senate held a solemn meeting. They were faced with the difficult decision of whether to stay and rebuild, or flee for lands untouched by war. After untold hours of debate, the Senate seemed inclined to abandon Rome, and even the objections of Marcus Furius Camillus, the dictator whose legions had liberated the city, could not sway them. But in the last few moments before the vote was called, it is said a nameless Roman centurion, unaware of the debate, marched his column towards the gathered Senate and, feeling weary, uttered a single order to his men. His words struck with the divine weight of providence, and the Senate heard in them an omen from the gods that could not be ignored. They voted unanimously, ushering in the second founding of Rome. It was 2,549 years later, almost to the day, that the order first issued by that Roman centurion would be uttered again. The assembled captains of a lost host of humanity, trapped by circumstances entirely different than those faced by the Roman senators of antiquity, yet with consequences entirely familiar, held a solemn meeting. They were to determine whether to stay and rebuild, or set forth blindly into the unknown. Again, perhaps with a sense of irony, those words were spoken, and again the man who spoke them had little appreciation for their weight, or what effect they would have on his people throughout the coming centuries. But those words were said all the same, and like the Senate before, the assembled captains voted unanimously, and like before, they ushered the founding of a new nation. That single Latin phrase is today inscribed on the foundation of the Antares Parliament, the center of a growing power born from the determination of disparate peoples and cultures from every corner of the earth. It speaks of struggle, of hardship, of loss, and the great common power of humanity to not only endure, but thrive, regardless of circumstance. It was long ago pronounced amidst the ruins of Rome, repeated millennia later in the cargo bay of a colony ship, and is today held as the guiding words of the Confederate Republics of Antares. Hic manebimus optime. Here we will remain most excellently. The Earhart colonization program was the culmination of a century of arduous progress. The experiments with the first rudimentary wormhole generators, the construction of the orbital gate network, even the establishment of the international alliance meant to oversee their use, each had been a painstaking process in their own right. But all were in the service of the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man had ever embarked. It was at first purely an act of faith and vision, for in spite of all the models and estimates, it was impossible to truly predict what benefits might await. Impossible until the whole of humanity witnessed the flag of a united Earth raised upon the surface of another world. The colonization of Alpha Centauri was difficult, as was Sirius, Tau Ceti, and Epsilon Indi. Each had their own respective eccentricities, and none of the first off-world colonies were truly amenable to human settlement. They were destined to instead be research outposts, mining sites, or test beds for future expeditions. But the discoveries within the Antares binary system changed everything. Hidden in the outer orbit of the system's fainter, smaller star, a planet was found. It seemed to invite human habitation, with an atmosphere and environment only slightly dissimilar from that of Earth itself. Life, evolutionarily simple as it might be, had already flourished there, and it seemed likely that mankind might as well. The first pioneers to arrive were jubilant in their reports. The first outposts performed flawlessly. Antares, therefore, would be the natural candidate for humanity's first, large-scale, off-world settlement. For decades, Antares was prepared, crops planted, infrastructure built, and plans laid. 6 million souls departed Earth's orbit on March 1st, 2159. The Earhart Flotilla was the largest ever constructed, carrying not only scientists, engineers, and specialists, but their families. They were to be the second wave of colonists, and Antares eagerly awaited them. The ships entered the artificial wormhole without incident, and the peculiarities of interstellar travel
what goes wrong?
weeks before Earth learned the first scheduled check-in had been missed. This was not entirely unexpected. No two transits were identical, but with every subsequent attempt at contact returning only static, hope fell into despair. Without resupply, the flotilla could survive for no more than 6 months. It is a testament to human optimism that attempts to reach them only ended after 5 times that. With the loss of the Earhart Flotilla, the passion and enthusiasm that had defined the colonization era quietly vanished, and all future efforts cancelled. The disaster was blamed on previously undiscovered instabilities within the gate network, and there was some comfort in the knowledge that those on board the flotilla likely never had a chance to realize that something had gone wrong. Statues were built and choirs sung to the 6 million lost sons and daughters of Earth, and the world tried to move on. Yet far across the universe, the pioneers of the Earhart Flotilla were very much alive. In place of the thriving colony meant to welcome them, and all its accompanying orbital infrastructure, supply networks, and communication relays, they had emerged within an entirely silent, entirely unknown star system. Instead of the dual suns of Antares, the new system had 3,
pretty scary,
orbited by a great many planets and moons. Shrouding them all was a miasma of ionized gases, a beautiful, all-encompassing swirl of colors. It was a vast, alien wilderness beyond anything previously discovered. Attempts to identify where they now were in relation to Earth or Antares all failed. No recognizable constellations were found, no frame of reference identified. In a single moment, their dreams had been dashed, and every soul aboard had to reconcile with the knowledge that they would never arrive at their intended destination. Without a warp gate, they were stuck. There even existed the possibility, however unlikely, that they had traveled not only through space, but through time, and might be hundreds or even thousands of years into the past or future.
That would
but the
suck, but
possibility remained.
I mean, they have their own solar system, so...
Grief and fear threatened to overwhelm the flotilla, but there was simply no time. They could operate for 6 months without resupply, and every second wasted might mean the difference between the life and death of 1, a dozen, or even thousands of people. Within the first day of their arrival, when every hope of returning to Earth had been extinguished, a new plan was set in motion. Under the hastily prepared Operation Longshot, thousands of automated probes were sent across the system, identifying potential locations for human settlement. Before even the first results had been returned, the flotilla frantically moved to reorganize itself. Everything aboard each ship, from the enormous, next-generation atmospheric processors and gravitational tethers, to the farming equipment and industrial machinery, all the way down to individual colonists, seeds, and gallons of water, had been the result of decades of planning. It was a triumph of logistics and administration on a scale beyond even the Martian settlements, the War of the 5 Cities, the Apollo landings, or the Schlieffen Plan. An army of officials had planned how the flotilla would be stockpiled down to the last spare tire, and in an instant, it had all been undone. Even if a verdant paradise was discovered within the system, the flotilla's population was too large to be supported by a single settlement. Combined with the risks of alien diseases, natural disasters, or potentially even hostile animal life,
it's safer
it was
to
decided
spread
that the
them.
flotilla would be scattered. Dozens of smaller colonies, dispersed across multiple sites, it was hoped, would be better suited to survive whatever dangers might await. What this meant was that supplies and equipment concentrated on a select few, or even on single ships, had to be distributed across the whole of the flotilla. One fleet had to be turned into many. Under normal circumstances, selecting a site for future colonization might take decades. Soil needed to be tested, the atmosphere carefully analyzed, and plate tectonics studied. Tens of thousands of factors had to be considered, all of which took time that the rapidly decentralizing flotilla could not afford.
They are risking it all, but
information had been relayed by the automated probes.
I'm gonna guess
Of where to
the
settle
risk
would
is
have
gonna
to
be
made
worth it.
purely on whatever data they had managed to gather. While the probes had not recorded the existence of any paradise world, the nightmare scenario had also not come to pass. If the entire trinary system was home only to toxic worlds and dead moons, then the flotilla would be left to die in space. As if acting on their prayers, the system was home to a number of worlds which, like Antares, were home to flourishing, if evolutionarily simple, life. 19 sites were selected across 8 planets scattered between each of the system's 3 stars. The size of these sites, and the number of resources, colonists, and ships allocated to each one varied considerably. Some sites encompassed entire continents, assigned hundreds of thousands of people, while others consisted of only a few scattered islands, intended to support only tens of thousands. Nor was the nature of these sites equal. From even the sparse details relayed back to the flotilla, it was clear some would take a much greater effort to be made habitable. Without any opportunity for last goodbyes or ceremonies, small groups of ships split away from the main flotilla and set course for what would become their new home. Each left with only the hope that what they had aboard would be enough for them to survive, in their memories of a world called Earth. In the final meeting of the Earhart leadership, representatives from each of the 19 sites made a pledge. While it was not the home they had expected, it was the one they had been given. In a unanimous decision, they declared the star system would be named Antares, and no matter how long it might take to overcome the fate rested upon them, one day, the pioneers of Antares would find one another, and together, whether in body or in spirit, head once more into the unknown. At first, several of the 19 sites remained in contact with one another. Gradually, however, the effort required to overcome the system's unique stellar interference and maintain the connection grew too strenuous. Goodbyes were said, and power reallocated to where it was better spent. Each of the 19 sites struggled in isolation. Some, in time, managed to overcome their new environment, transforming their colony ships into the centers of new, emergent nations. Others had to fight for decades simply to get their crops to grow or find clean water to drink. A few did everything they could to survive, only to learn that it would not be enough.
Music change, now start.
And contact was re-established.
Now we get some good news.
And across stars. Finally, 149 years after landing, the pioneers of Antares established regular contact with one another. The reunification was bittersweet, as the full picture of what had happened began to take form. Of the 19 original sites, 11 had survived. Of the fallen 8, 2 had starved, 4 had succumbed to disease, 1 had frozen, 1 had flooded, while the fate of the last was sealed. Among the surviving sites, the level of success varied considerably. A few nations had just barely managed to survive and would be reliant on outside help to truly thrive. Others had developed into one or sometimes several nation-states. Reunion Day was celebrated and honored across the system, but despite their common heritage, the sense of fellowship that had existed across the Earhart flotilla had been greatly eroded within the nations of Antares. In an idealistic attempt to remedy this, on the 3rd annual Reunion Day, a new institution was created, the Antares Assembly. This forum was an intergovernmental attempt to maintain peace, security, and a new united Antares. Political friction grew nearly immediately, several of the system's most powerful nations began maneuvering to assume the mantle of leadership.
Of
Mutually
course.
beneficial trade,
Is
spiraled
there gonna be a
opportunism, and the
civil
establishment
war
of rival trade blocs.
amongst each other before they become truly
Within a
united?
decade of Reunion Day, the Assembly's three largest nations, the Federation of Jat Farid, the Republic of Retiva, and the Republic of Chengatai, had each established their own supranational unions. The Association of Antares Nations, the Antares Community, and a Rico Pact each competed for political clout, attempting to win over the other nations of Antares. While the benefits of each alliance were considerable, the increasing tensions between the three only served to frustrate and alienate many of the neutral nations they were attempting to influence. On March 1st, 164 AL, the Republic of Maltawan, the Republic of Sabmadi, the Free State of Sagallo, and the Union of Thanjanal established the non-aligned movement of Antares. Unlike the unions backed by the system's superpowers, the language which defined the non-aligned movement was clear and concise, promising mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, non-interference in domestic affairs, and most importantly, equality and mutual benefit. The non-aligned movement quickly became the largest within the system, leading to the eventual termination of its three major competitors. By 189 AL, Jat Farid, Retiva, and Chengatai had become the last major holdouts, and compared to the increasingly gridlocked Antares Assembly, the non-aligned movement had begun introducing sweeping laws and reforms that promised to further integrate its member nations. On September 4th, 191 AL, the last three holdouts were unofficially accepted into the non-aligned movement, which, as a face-saving measure, was immediately dissolved. Instead, the Antares Assembly underwent a complete reform, adopting both the structure, laws, and decorum of the non-aligned movement. Veto power and other benefits enjoyed by its largest nations were likewise removed from the institution. With Jat Farid, Retiva, or Chengatai no longer able to impede the decisions made by the Assembly, the first real talks of a system-wide unification began. The establishment of a centralized sovereign state, with the nations of Antares reduced to subnational entities, or even eliminated entirely, was seen as the most efficient option, but one that lacked the necessary political support. Only the smaller, poorer nations, those which would benefit the most from this arrangement, seriously considered it. Instead, a compromise was reached, and a system created that would wield considerable power in dealing with interstellar affairs, yet leave domestic issues in the hands of its constituent states. The Antares Assembly was officially dissolved on April 22nd, 202 AL. Simultaneously, the Confederate Republics of Antares were formally established, and Confederation Day celebrated across the system. It was both praised and criticized as being very different from the union that had been first imagined in the final meeting of the Earhart Flotilla. While certainly endowed with the potential to unify the star system, it also allowed its 11 member nations the implicit right of succession. A parliamentary confederacy, the authority of the government is today mainly limited to interstellar development and discovery, foreign affairs, and defense. Its ability to interfere in the affairs of its republics is limited, and addressed in a slightly vague general welfare clause within its constitution. The Confederation's executive office is headed by a prime minister, who also serves as the head of state, but whose authority is relatively weak. This individual likewise serves as the head of the Cabinet of Ministers, which acts as the federal executive governing body of the Confederacy. There is no fixed term of office, nor any kind of term limit, and a Prime Minister can remain in office so long as they maintain the confidence of the majority of the Antares Parliament. There is an informal tradition, dating back to the non-aligned movement, however, that a government must call an election once every 4 years. Major political power within the Confederacy is instead held by the Parliament of the Confederate Republics of Antares, or simply the Antares Parliament. A bicameral legislature, it has 2 separate chambers, an upper house known as the Senate,
I like the design
and
of
a
that
lower
building.
house called the Chamber of Representatives. The Senate is composed of 5 representatives from each constituent republic and appointed by the Prime Minister. There are few qualifications to become a senator, only that the individual is not beholden to economic vagaries or turmoil, and a citizen of the republic they've been chosen to represent. In comparison to the Chamber of Representatives, whose members are apportioned to the republics by population size, and is therefore seen as representing the population, the intent of the Senate is to act as the voice of the republics. While officially the upper house of Parliament, it is first only in order of precedence for the purposes of protocol. As a matter of both practice and custom, it is the Chamber of Representatives that is dominant within Parliament, and to whom the Prime Minister is solely responsible. While legislation can be introduced by either house, the Senate is meant to act as a place of sober second thought. The approval of both houses is necessary for legislation, but the Senate has only rejected on average 2 bills per year in its short history. The Chamber of Representatives is, in contrast to the Senate, a democratically elected body. There are currently 809 members in the lower house, with this number expected to increase with the total population of the Confederacy. Seats within the chamber are distributed roughly in proportion to the population of each republic. The Antares Constitution, however, contains several provisions regarding this method of representation, and as a result, there is some regional malapportionment relative to the total population. Such clauses are everywhere within the Constitution, intended to balance the will of the people with the power of the republics. This means that the efficiency of the Antares government is always in a state of flux, with both the republics and people able to disrupt legislation, yet not always enough to approve it. Backhand deals and a variety of committees, both official and unofficial, have become the preferred method of passing legislature, and the outcome of most votes is almost always known before they are brought to the floor. Combined with a lack of history, tradition, and precedence, the Antares Parliament can be often chaotic, and sometimes bordering on violent. Shouting matches have repeatedly erupted and are in danger of becoming routine. Together with the High Court of Antares, the Office of the Prime Minister and Parliament of Antares are all located in Sigalo, the capital city of Antares. While a city within the Republic of Avjari Vet, Sigalo exists as a distinct federal entity. While many of its constituent republics maintain their own official languages, none have been granted official status by the wider Confederacy. French, Arabic, Swahili, Spanish, and Vietnamese are most predominantly used in government affairs, while Russian, English, Standard Hindi, Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, and Turkish are also occasionally used when dealing with specific republics. The Antares Constitution expressly prohibits the adoption of any official language, and this provision is unlikely to change in the immediate future. The same restrictions apply in adopting any kind of state religion. Islam is the largest faith across the republics of the Confederacy, followed closely by sizable Christian, Hindu, and atheist communities. The overwhelming desire to not favor any language or religion at the expense of any other is on the surface meant to place each republic on equal footing within the federal government. However, multiculturalism has emerged as a key part of every state within the Confederacy, the natural outcome of the flotilla's initial demographics. The Earhart Flotilla consisted mainly of settlers from Africa, Central and Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, Oceania, and South America, the regions generally left out of the first wave of colonists. In an attempt to force genetic diversity, these populations were deliberately intertwined once the flotilla arrived in the system, and their survival across successive generations was in doubt. As a result, the modern nations of the Confederacy are uniquely culturally and ethnically diverse. While intolerance and domestic tensions have not been eliminated entirely and remain a major problem in several of the republics, the Confederation's constitution aims to foster further integration, even at the expense of political efficiency. These quirks in the Constitution have resulted in some strange, seemingly contradictory practices. This is nowhere more apparent than in the organization of the Confederate military. Divided into 2 major branches, the Confederate Navy and Confederate Army, major restrictions exist in how both these services must be raised and deployed within the Antares system. The Confederate Navy is the nation's space warfare branch. While many of the republics operate their own orbital branches, the Navy is the only institution within the Confederacy permitted to operate warships of a specific size and capabilities. As a matter of law, however, the federal government is forbidden to independently construct or order the construction of these warships. Every ship in the fleet is in practice one that has been donated by individual republics. By contrast, while the republics are legally allowed to construct such warships, they are prohibited from operating them. While such an arrangement has the potential to cripple the Confederate Navy in times of crisis, such laws are mostly ceremonial, and the federal government has on numerous occasions placed unofficial orders for warships which are then serendipitously constructed and donated by various republics. The same kind of restrictions have been placed on the Confederate Army, which for all its history has been comprised of only a select few administrative and logistics personnel. It exists mainly theoretically, as the Confederate Army is barred from operating on any territory administered by the republics, leaving essentially nowhere within the star system where the branch would be allowed to mobilize. The lack of any armed conflict across the entirety of the Antares system's history has left little necessity for such a force, and even the republics themselves maintain only small, garrison forces, not suited to offensive operations. In the event of war, the Confederate government has the authority to call for volunteers, but not to enact conscription, which remains the sole right of the republics. Any division granted to the Confederacy would be both raised and equipped by their respective republics, and how such a command structure might fare in wartime remains a matter of concern. Many fear that individual republics might leverage the deployment of any divisions raised in an attempt to guide national strategy. The need for military forces at all remains a matter of contention within Parliament. While nations on Earth had detected seemingly artificial broadcasts of repeating mathematical patterns, unequivocal proof of alien life had not yet been found at the time of the Earhart flotilla's departure, much less the desire to defend against such threats. The ardent will to maintain military forces by both the leadership of constituent republics and the Confederacy is often baffling to the general populace, which has readily supported such measures. What has never been revealed, however, is that a small part of the founding myth of Antares has been built on a lie. When the Earhart flotilla was to have emerged in their intended destination, they were to have received 8 scheduled messages from Earth, each containing only trivial details concerning items that might have changed during transit. The colonists were informed that these messages never arrived, lost during whatever anomaly threw them off course. But in truth, the Earhart flotilla received all 8, and at least 100 others. Broadcasts not intended for them, but somehow received by the flotilla all the same. Most were scrambled and garbled, impossible to truly understand, but the small number that have been restored are terrifying. Few have seen them, only the highest military and government officials of the republics and the Confederacy. But even the most resolute pacifist among them have been forced to agree that a standing army might be necessary. The Confederate Republics of Antares is still a young nation, one faced with a daunting challenge. Over 2 centuries ago, their ancestors left Earth for a new home, only to unexpectedly arrive in another. For all the division between the republics and the apparent weakness of the Confederacy, the will and desire to seek out Earth has never wavered. On the foundation of the Antares Parliament and countless other buildings and institutions across the star system are etched the words, Hic manebimus optime. Here we will remain most excellently. It was spoken first within the Senate of the Roman Empire, again within the cargo bay of a colony ship within the Earhart flotilla, and is today the guiding words of the Antares Confederacy. The flags of 11 republics speak to the fortitude, courage, and spirit needed in the pursuit of those words. The graves of 8 colonies speak to the necessity of sacrifice to live, fight, and if need be, die in the pursuit of those words. And the emblem of one nation speaks to the spirit of the human race to embrace cooperation, mutual respect, and a resolute spirit in the pursuit of those words, not only when it is easy, but when it is hard. Today, as the citizens of the Confederacy look outward, not only to one another, but past the boundaries of their star system, that phrase has taken on a new meaning, and one small addition. Here, we will remain most excellently, but not here alone.
Well, there you have it, folks. That was the prologue for the Antares Confederacy, and yeah, not gonna lie, towards the end it got a little bit boring. I mean, they explained it very thoroughly about how the Confederacy works and all that, but that's just that's a small detail that I didn't really care about. But yeah, it ended with a promise that okay, something's coming, so here's hoping it's gonna be something very interesting. I'm not gonna lie, the beginning from them leaving Earth to starting their original 19 colonies to the first re-established contact, that era was very interesting. But yeah, so we don't know why what happened in their little space jump, only that something caused them to jump to all points nowhere, a distant part of space in a whatever galaxy, possibly possibly in the future or in the past even. But I was surprised when they, after they had started their colonies, I knew that some of them wouldn't make it, but I was honestly expecting more of them to die. I was surprised that it was only 8 that had 8 had been lost. But yeah, and some have thrived to be self-sufficient, some barely managing to survive. We saw some artwork from that, really nice artwork. But yeah, and it makes sense that okay, they're in this solar system seemingly cut off from everything, so it makes sense they have such control over that they keep their militaries and whatnot controlled. I mean, only if an outside force attacks them, then that'd be deep shit, but they did mention something about how those orders are only ceremonial, whatever that means. I'm guessing if shit hits the fan, they can just press a button and okay, they're ready to fight, I'm guessing. But yeah, interesting to see. Did they in fact end up in the past or in the future? If they're in the past, I mean, I don't know how long they're gonna be confined into this solar system, but potentially at some point they might be reconnected with humanity across wherever they've spread. And if they're in the future, unless the other human worlds have died out, they could still potentially reconnect. But yeah, I'm guessing they're still in the same time. They're just separated, and sooner or later they're going to re-establish contact, and maybe they'll, I don't know, depends on entirely how the rest of humanity, I suppose, will view them. They might still see them as a colony under their jurisdiction, while the Antares people might see them as independent. But then again, at the beginning, after this incident, they mentioned they abandoned their colonization of other galaxies. So maybe they're confined in their home galaxy. But I mean, they did have settlements in Alpha Centauri and wherever, so I don't know. I am very interested to see where this leads. But yeah, what do you guys think? Write your thoughts down below. Hope you enjoyed my reaction. Don't forget to like, subscribe if you want, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye.